St. Augustine famously teaches us that you ought always to read the Bible so as to increase the love of God and neighbor. And Jesus taught us that the neighbor we are called to love is the very person that often we are least likely to want to love, or that we are most likely to want to dismiss, to otherize, to dehumanize, to objectify. The neighbor for Jesus is the tax collector. The neighbor is the leper. The neighbor is the Samaritan. The neighbor is the woman caught in adultery. The neighbor is the mother, the woman of Cana in Matthew 15, Canaanite. This ought in turn to inform how we read the Bible. And with that in mind, I want to present to you a simple argument for reading the Canaanite conquest. So let's start with the first premise. Any reading of the Bible that treats groups of people as cancer to be eradicated should be rejected by the Christian. I hope it is clear, based upon what we just said about the teaching of Augustine and, most importantly, the teaching of Jesus, that we ought to accept this first premise. Second premise, historical readings of the Canaanite conquest treat the Canaanites, a group of people, as cancer to be eradicated. Conclusion, therefore, historical readings of the Canaanite conquest should be rejected by the Christian. That's the argument. I want to say a little bit more now about the second premise. This is a quote from Jack Deere, a biblical scholar in the Bible Knowledge Commentary published in 1983. Here, Jack Deere is explaining the absolute language directed against the Canaanites in Deuteronomy and Joshua. It is language that calls for their forcible expulsion from the land, for their complete eradication or their mass killing, and for the destruction of every cultural implement that represents their existence. And this is how Jack Deere, the biblical scholar, explains why this was justified in direction toward the Canaanites. He says the Canaanites constituted a moral cancer, and even one of them, even a child left alive, had the potential of introducing an idolatry and immorality which would spread rapidly among the Israelites and bring about the destruction of God's own people. Now, Jack Deere is very correct on one thing. He is capturing here the nature, the urgency of the rhetoric one finds in Deuteronomy and Joshua against the Canaanites. They are consistently presented as a cancer, something that has to be cut out, excised from the promised land, lest they corrupt the Israelites and the purity of their witness. Even one cancer cell left in the body could metastasize and grow into a cancerous tumor that could threaten the life of the individual. And even one Canaanite child being left alive could metastasize and threaten the very existence of the Israelites. That is the rhetoric of Jack Deere, which he is not just relaying as the rhetoric of the original text, but which he is using here as a moral justification for mass slaughter, for genocidal expulsion, for ethnic cleansing. This brings us back again to the words of Jesus and the teaching in the life of Jesus, who consistently taught us, it has been said, hate your enemies. I say, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. He redefined who the good neighbor is in terms of the good Samaritan. He told everybody who was about to pick up a rock for the woman caught in adultery, let he who's without sin cast the first stone. He repeatedly challenged any attempt to otherize groups and individuals, certainly including dehumanizing them as cancer, as a way to warrant the killing of even one small child by treating that child as cancer. Now, we all would have the clear moral vision to realize how absolutely corrupt and debased what Jack Deere is arguing here if he were to present it in contemporary terms. If he were to say, there's a particular group of people today, an ethnic or religious or cultural or racial group that presents a cancer on the body politic, and we need to eradicate that population in our midst Even if there's one child left, that child needs to be killed because that population threatens us as a cancer. We would recognize unqualified that Jack Deere was morally corrupt and was offering genocide language, which should be absolutely condemned not only by any self respecting Christian disciple who professes to follow Jesus, but by any civil person living in the 21st century. And yet, when he talks about these people as if they're Canaanites from 3,000 years ago, suddenly it's okay. But it's not okay for a Judeo Christian hermeneutic that says you ought always to read the Bible so as to increase love of God and neighbor, and you ought always to embrace the neighbor who is the outsider, the other, those most likely to be dehumanized, objectified, rejected. And you can never allow for any reading of the Bible to be accepted within your community if that reading warrants the dehumanization, the objectification, the treating as cancer any particular people group, and that includes Canaanites.